Hey, this is Chip, your host, and I want to welcome you to Season 2 of the Erie Music History Podcast. In this first episode, I speak with Ed Russell-Pooton. Many of you probably know him as Ed Pooton, and we'll get into that name change thing and plenty of other funny and interesting stories regarding Ed's days growing up and learning music in Erie. Ed has lived in New York City since the late 1970s, and he has continued to play and teach guitar to this day. He's learned from some of the best, and he's played at just about every iconic New York City venue. I actually didn't plan to interview Ed for this episode. I had reached out to him originally to get some more information on John Mazza because I wanted to interview John, and I didn't know much about him, and I knew that Ed knew John. So I called up Ed, but once we started chatting, I realized I was talking with a guy who really knew the Erie music scene in the late 60s, early 70s, and he's actually, frankly, friends with plenty of Erie musicians to this day. So he was a hoot to talk to. We had a lot of fun, and I'm really glad that I've got to know him and call him a friend. We both have a love for this city and a respect for its musical legacy, and we've had a great time connecting for this episode. So here's episode 1 of season 2 featuring Ed Russell-Pooton. I hope you like it.
Ed, welcome to the podcast. I appreciate you being on with me. And, we talked a little bit about your family name. Start with that because I was a little confused when we first connected. There's Ed Russell. You're like me. You have two names, Chip and Dan, except yours are both your last name, Russell and Pooton. So how does that work?
Well, the exception for me that's different than you is I'm not trying to stay out of jail.
Okay.
So
right.
let's start with that one. But seriously, here's what the get-go goes on that. I moved to New York in around 76, and all the contractors were Italian.
Okay.
And then the second subdivision was Jewish. But the Italians, you got to understand something. This is like 35, 40 years ago. And the name Pooton is a derogatory term, which I won't go into. Also has 3 zeros or O's. And so these contractors, they had this one thing in common. They didn't like to pay the musicians. So they would issue a check and you would have to fight for it, et cetera, et cetera. However, if there are more than 2 letters misspelled in your name back then in the banking system, the check was null and void. Wow. So then you fought for the check once. So it would be Pooton.
Right.
And so I was hanging out with my Italian guitar teacher here in New York, Carmine D'Amico, who is passed, but a superstar at the time, did all the work for Michael Jackson and everybody.
Wow.
And he said, listen, what's your middle name? I go, it's Russell. He goes, listen, you don't have to fight it. You don't have to do a legal name change. Just go with Ed Russell. And he goes, it's perfect. And so that's why I changed it.
All right.
It was all a practical nature. It was not an ego thing or anything like that. It's just that I could not work effectively in New York with the name Pooton, unfortunately.
So you formally changed your last name to Russell?
Well, you don't have to.
Oh, you don't have to. You just went
like if you have a middle name, you can use that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what your middle name is, but you could legally use that and go through none of the, jumping through hoops to change it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. Last night I was at a gig and they went to write a check and they went to write it to Chip Shell. And I said, no, the bank doesn't know who Chip Shell is.
Exactly.
The non-entity. Yeah.
Very equivocal situation.
Right. Okay. All right. So do people in Erie that are going to be listening to this, do they know you more as Pooton probably?
Well, they do. The thing is that's, why I'd mentioned to you in passing that I just think we should hyphenate it and say Edward Russell, bang, Pooton. They would know me, all my students that had happened at Markham's Music with Keith Fischecco back in the day. They would know me as Pooton. They wouldn't know me as Russell. So when go into Facebook. I have to do a little thing, song and dance.
Right.
And I've been kicking around if I retire, do I want to just go back to Pooton? Then nobody in New York knows me.
Right. And you've been there longer.
So I'm just going to go with the hyphenated route.
So let's go back in the day. So when did you start playing guitar?
I started playing the guitar when I was going to 4th or 5th grade.
Oh.
And I went to Glenwood High.
Okay.
Glenwood, no, not High. Glenwood, whatever it was.
Glenwood Elementary or what?
Glenwood Elementary.
Yeah.
And in the old building that is now a fire department.
Yeah, I got you. On Peach Street.
On Peach Street.
Yeah.
And then Ozeki's was down the block. And I do believe it was Ed Ozeki's. I was playing the guitar before this, but we moved to Erie when I was in the end of 4th grade. And my mom would take us to the big barn, which was across the street. The Red Barn, was that it?
Sure, yeah.
It was the big hamburger joint.
Yep, that was it, Red Barn.
And all I remember was the Red Barn and tons of snow. And then she would take me across to, I believe it was Ed Ozeki that was teaching us. And she insisted that we take guitar lessons. And that's when I started.
When you say we, you and Bud, your brother? Or?
My brother played the guitar. He later became a great drummer and friends
Right.
with Steve McConnell. But back then, no. It was Easter every day. We would wear the same things. We would dress the same way.
Gotcha. All right.
Easter every day, Chip. Every day.
Well, how long does it take for you to be in your first band?
Well, what happened is I went through a series of guitar teachers. I ended up in West Erie Plaza, don't ask me how, with actually a mutual friend, Vinny Stefanelli's brother, Tony, who was really a bass player, but teaching young kids the guitar out there. And that wasn't working out so well. So we ended up, because we lived on Cherry Street, so the most practical thing for Mom was to take me to the Ronzettis.
Okay.
To Basil Ronzetti. I studied with his father, Mose. Wow, that was a nightmare. And then I begged Basil to take me on as a student. And Basil was tough.
Yeah.
I studied very hard under Basil, but Basil had a couple tricks. He knew I would be something, so he had a couple nasty tricks.
So we're talking when? Late 60s?
We're talking about the late 60s. And then to get positioned with Basil, what happened is he had the chair outside of his room so if you were the next student, you were listening to the music lesson before you.
Yeah.
He made sure that I sat in that chair while he was teaching John Novella,
Oh, geez.
Preston Lindy, and I sat there with my mouth open, like John Novella. Oh my God! But you know what? Basil knew what he was doing, and I practiced really hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
For Basil, and till his passing moments, Basil and I were dear friends, and I owe it all to Basil Ronzetti in Erie, Pennsylvania.
I think a lot of guys would say the same thing.
Yeah, there was no better an instructor to go to than Basil Ronzetti. And then I also studied with Preston Lindy,
right,
who was always laying around in my house because nobody had anything better to do. And so we had a ball, and I learned how to play the guitar.
And then what happened? Who'd you start playing with? Was that The Image? Did you guys form it?
Yeah, that was The Image, and the original band. I met this guy full of pimples by the name of Durf Hopseger. And
sounds like a weirdo.
And he didn't play the bass then.
Okay.
He had a horrible Kent guitar. Phil Snyderman was on keyboards, and then my mother wouldn't let buy the PA system unless my brother was on drums.
Okay.
Previous to this, I had a small band with Rick Baldwin and Rick Karate. That was my first little thing. But the first real organized band was The Image, where we went out and did gigs.
Where did Frank Sonnenberg and Albert Smith fit into that? Did they come
Well,
later?
they did the replacements.
Okay.
Frank Sonnenberg replaced Phil Snyderman because Phil was 2 years, I think, older than me and Durf. Durf was 1 year older than me. So as the kids lined up to go to college, Phil went to Syracuse and later became I think the editor of the Baltimore Sun or something, very successful.
Yeah.
And so as people left Erie, they had to be replaced. And so Frank Sonnenberg replaced Phil Snyderman on keys. By then, Durf was established on bass, studying that with Basil. And my brother was studying with Flip Bellotti.
Okay. Yeah.
Another maniac.
Another great guitar player.
Well, he's a great drummer.
Or drummer. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
right.
Flip.
Right.
Flip was the backup drummer for Gene Krupa and a wild man. He taught Steve McConnell, who was always over at my house.
Yeah.
And I saw some of the thing with Steve and love to Steve. And so our house was wide open. We had a swimming pool in the backyard at 1107. Everybody used to hang out. And we just play music all day long during the summers.
Did you play like Wyco dances and stuff? Did the Image play out?
Oh, yeah. We started, our first gig was at Wyco. And then it started to evolve and evolve and evolve. And we bought a post office truck on auction, painted it psychedelic, along with everybody else, Bobby Berger, and all the kids were doing this. But the embarrassing part, and it was a clutch.
Sure.
It was a lot to drive.
Yeah.
4 on the floor, baby. And my mother would have to drive us to the gigs. Oh my God, how embarrassing is that?
How old were you?
We were like 15, 16 years old.
And you bought this truck.
My mother bought the truck.
Okay. All right.
And so it was painted fire engine red because once they sold it, I believe legally, the post office didn't want anything affiliated. So they would spray paint it red.
Right. Gotcha. Okay.
And, so we ended up with one of these and we played so many gigs. We just leave our equipment in the car overnight and just pray the thing started up the next day to go do another one.
Right. Now, and am I correct in saying, like, let's keep in mind who your family was. Was your dad the head of the Chamber of Commerce at the time, and his sons are running around in an old mail truck? It's painted red.
Of course. And when we got in the truck, we had football helmets with the face guard sheared off. And if we got to the gig, man, like Harbor Creek High was one where the janitor wouldn't open up the doors. We just broke into the school.
So you're playing school dances, you're playing Wyco.
Oh yeah, we're playing Grand Funk. We're playing Pictures of Matchstick Men. We're playing Get Your Motor Running, Born to Be Wild. We're playing Santana stuff. We're doing all that, all right. We all the groups did basically the same repertoire at that point.
You weren't into original stuff at the time.
No. I did write some original songs, poppy tunes, but basically we were playing pool parties, high schools, homecoming dances, beer blasts, college beer blasts.
You're 15, 16 years old, you're playing college parties.
Of course.
Yeah. All right.
Why do you think I am where I am now today, Chip?
Exactly right. All right. Well, how long did the Image last?
Well, the Image last, I would say, from the late 60s till probably when we kind of graduated. Then I started to move in different ways. And I had become, from working at Markham's, I was a guitar teacher at Markham's at the time.
Oh, okay.
And I become very close with Keith Vasheko, bless his heart, may he rest in peace.
And you started working there when you and Keith are both young, right? I mean,
well, Keith and I are very young, and we became like brothers.
yeah.
I mean, and you don't work in the same store 8-9 hours a day. And Keith showed me how to turn on my first Vox Cambridge reverb. He was very helpful, and all the people around him in his groups. I have so much respect for Chuck Leone, and then Bobby Arlett, who I later, a vocalist who I worked with.
Okay.
And then Keith was a very dear friend and introduced me to a lot of musicians and gave me a place to teach. And then Dale Higgins, they all helped me out.
And you went to McDowell. Did Keith go there too?
Keith went to McDowell, and yes, and the story of Keith allowed me to sit with the guys that were 1 year older at the lunchroom that were all musicians. And
that's what I was going to say. Did you know him in school?
Now, as older people, that's all a bunch of BS. But back then, it meant everything.
Sure, right? Yeah.
I mean, it was.
Yeah, you knew him in school. Gotcha.
I owe Keith a lot.
So you start teaching at Markham's with Keith, and I mean, obviously Keith was a great player too. Was he taking lessons at the time still, or?
Well, first of all, I never, believe it or not, Chip, never really knew where Keith's background was from. Like, I know a little bit. When you look at that time, it gets murky. Like, another great guitar player from that era is Art Phillips, who's a friend of mine, but Art's a tremendous musician.
Okay.
But I know a little bit about where Art studied, but Keith, I never really asked him that question. The problem with pinning down Vasheko was he had such a fantastic ear. He was doing things that would strain me now, like learning the clap by the yes. Keith could hear a mistake a mile away. And but he did it with dignity, and he was wonderful to everybody. He never looked at himself in the mirror. Keith was a wonderful person.
Humble guy. Yeah. Well, you eventually go beyond just working together and being friends. You form Twang, is that right?
Twang.
Great band name.
Yes. Subtitled The Breakfast of Astronauts. That was an absolutely wild rock and roll band.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had Bobby Arlett was on vocals. You're not going to get any better than that. Kevin Bensing was on the rhythm guitar and vocals. He's completely out of his mind. Keith Vasheko was on bass, but we would switch off so he could get his rocks off, playing the guitar on things. My brother was on drums. The original Twang had Gail Sadlier on keyboards, who I was living with, because our band house was on East Lake Road, just outside of Northeast. Okay. And later, Durf took Gail's spot when she left the band.
And he played keys.
And Durf played keys.
Okay.
Because he was studying keyboards with Basil.
Oh, okay. All right. So I've heard, or read some of the crazy stories. You just said that Twang's a pretty crazy band. I mean,
Twang was absolutely out of their mind.
And I kind of picked on Durf. We both know Durf. I know some of those crazy stories. I mean, you were doing Frank Zappa, and tell me a little bit about this band, because I mean, some of the things that you were doing on stage, it seemed very theatrical.
Well, the basic thing about Erie, and everybody that knows me there, I don't blow my own horn. I've never been one to do that. But Twang was the first one to involve musical theater
Okay.
into music.
Yeah.
So everybody says, well, how could you get hired back then playing a Zappa set?
Yeah.
Well, it's because the Zappa set was completely out of hand. Okay. And I actually talked to Durf about this the other day. He brought a first date out to see us. I was somewhere in New York. We played right across the line a lot.
Sure.
And we were doing Call Any Vegetable by Frank Zappa, where I had a gas mask filled with rutabaga. And we had a fork and a knife because you had to eat the vegetables. And then we had a giant joint and Kevin made all of these in his shop.
Uh-huh.
And so what would happen is I wouldn't know what happened from gig to gig, Chip. I would go there with my SG. You can see I'm a big lover.
I see that in the background. Very
of
nice.
SGs.
Yep.
And I would basically like Don Pardo comment on the situation at hand as things would unfold.
You're like the MC.
The MC, yeah.
Yeah.
And so on this one particular gig where Durf was there with his first date, Kevin decided to attack him with a fork.
And Kevin knows Durf at this point.
Oh yeah, but that doesn't matter. Kevin's out of his mind. Okay. So yeah, he beat Durf to a pulp. And I finally, and then a couple weeks later, Kevin's wife was tied up on stage, screaming, "Stop it." The whole thing was out of hand. I was going, and now Phyllis is screaming. And bango, they're putting what is that silly stringy thing on her. And oh my. So I told Keith, I think I have to break this thing up. It's just getting to be, too insane. I mean, the places were packed.
They were, yeah.
To see Zappa, and we were doing things like parts of Billy the Mountain, Blonde Dick, all these things. My Guitar Wants to Kill Your Mama.
Yeah.
That was like standard repertoire.
That's what he does.
Magic Fingers.
You weren't doing just Zappa though, right?
No, first two couple sets were subdued.
Okay, all right.
Long Train Running. We did stuff like Cold Ethel.
Who's that by?
That's by Alice Cooper. It's a story of necrophilia.
Oh, great. Sure. Yeah.
Loving the Dead.
Those are always really nice songs to hear on your first date. I imagine Durf did not go on with that young lady.
Told me. Here's my Durf impersonation. Ed, it was my first date. And Ed, it was my last date.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That's Durf.
That's funny. Well, so I know that Keith then joins up with Pat Arlett, right, or Bob Arlett, and joins ATV eventually, right?
Yes, and the original people are friends of mine. Pat Tallarico, very nice man. By the way, Pat Tallarico turned me on to Pat Martino.
Oh, okay, all right.
And so that's when I went to Cleveland and met Pat, and then started to study jazz on a serious level. Pat Tallarico was the person that hooked me into Pat Martino.
Interesting. And that band ATV had to be, drastically different than what Twang was at this point. But Twang then evolved, right? From that Zappa show to
no, it never evolved. What happened is I didn't know what I was doing. I did gigs just to make money with a couple bands, and I thought about this the other night, but I no. My next deal was Mercy Sakes with Scotty Coon.
Okay.
And Danny McNamara was in that band, who's an incredible drummer. And then, as she's known now, Janice Sands.
Yep.
Back then it was Janice Wassell.
Right.
And she was living with a guy by the name of T. I never knew his last name.
Okay.
I never knew what descent T was from. Back then, to our credit, though, it didn't matter who was from what or who was from what. Obviously, Keith Pacheco is Italian, right?
Right.
McNamara's Irish.
Yeah.
You know, you could put that, but nobody cared as long as you played. You know, there was absolutely, and I mean, I worked with a lot of horn players that were black, and you know, back then the problem wasn't what it is today.
Sure. And so you played with Janice in Mercy Sakes?
Yes, and
Okay.
absolutely one of the best vocalists. And it was pretty much in Erie. The top two were her and
Paula.
Paula
Yeah, Paula Holmes.
Holmes,
So-
and she was Paula Grack at the time.
Right. So
Right.
was Mercy Sakes prior to Holy Smoke for Janice?
No, I think you know, and you know, I love Dickie Buckle. Shout out to Dickie, great
Yeah.
guitar player, and Ronnie Guzik.
Yeah.
I do believe that they were the first people in the Cali Club.
Right.
And I believe they started the whole shenanigans. And then I think what happened was after they left, I don't know if we were the second ones in, but I want to tell you, Chip, we did a long run there,
Yeah.
like 8
Hmm.
months to a year run.
Mercy Sakes.
Mercy sakes. And that
Cool.
had McNamara, Scotty Kuhn, Janice, Danny, who was later replaced by my brother. We have a theme here, don't we?
Yeah.
And it was absolutely wonderful engagement. I learned how to play there because every guitar player would come in, finish their gigs, and come to the Cali Club. And there was not one moment where you could slack down.
So you were playing those late night gigs.
We started at around 11:30, and we went to 4.
Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah. And so you did that for a while with Mercy Sakes. And then how did Banks Money fit into that whole thing?
Excuse me, who?
Banks Money, weren't you in that band too? Or
No.
no? Okay, so The Image, Twang, Mercy Sakes, and then
Right.
you cut out to New York.
Yeah, there was another band in between where we went out west for a while, but the van blew up in the desert. I lost all my equipment. I had my SG, it was in the back of my car at the time. And then I stayed out west for a while, but then I came back and then I moved to New York.
Okay, and you moved to New York to teach guitar, to play
No,
guitar?
I never moved to teach the guitar.
No,
I moved to have a career.
make it big. Yeah.
Because I was at that age.
Sure, right. About what age was this? In 77, you said?
25, 26 years old.
Okay, right,
And that's when I got into the Decoys,
right.
and things were really, really looking up.
Talk to me about the Decoys. What was that band like?
That band was the best band I've ever been in, and I think it's the best rock and roll band I've ever heard in my entire life. Bar none.
Okay,
George Usher is a superstar. He's one of the best songwriters. Actually, Keith and John recorded us. I have the tapes back here. I've never heard them,
okay.
but we played everywhere. We played Max's Kansas City the week after John Lennon. We did all the stuff I ever dreamed of doing. We rehearsed in a basement on 86th and 3rd Avenue, and we ran the record store for the Upper East Side during the day. And New York was really alive.
Yeah.
New York was and just the van ride downtown would have murdered most people.
Yeah.
I mean, New York was alive. I mean, I used to, in between students, like I'd sit and teach the supers kid on 88th Street and Madison, and I'd sit there because it was the same every week, and I became real good friends with Lou Reed.
Oh, wow.
So because we would just hang out and talk.
Yeah.
Because we were both there at the same time. I mean, New York was amazing back then, Chip.
Right, I bet.
You know,
And why did you come back to record it? Did you record at Twang? And
well, we recorded on Keith's place on 26th, 29th,
Right. 29th. Yeah.
and Raspberry.
Yep.
Something
Right.
like that. And I just thought that Keith could catch something that wasn't being caught. And then we were recorded by Herb Alpert and A&M. We got a record deal with A&M. And, you know, everybody goes, oh, you got a record deal with A&M. That's fine. Well, the little do you know that everybody has a record deal with A&M because they're going to sign you for tax write-offs.
Ah, interesting. All right.
Oh, yeah. They sign a lot of people. But yes, I did sit in there and go through that whole deal with Herb Alpert. And
I imagine those two different recording sessions were very different. One in Keith's house in Erie, Pennsylvania, and one in New York with Herb Alpert.
well, the one in New York was like a huge studio. It was big. Like when you see the studios like Abbey Road,
right,
and you see how the mammoth size they are.
Yeah.
And those studios are all gone now in New York.
Yeah, right.
I'm sure Abbey Road still exists because of the name.
Sure.
But
Right.
And it was a ball, and we did some pretty crazy tunes there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And George Usher had hit after hit after hit. And then we had Not the Trembling Kind, which was number one in Europe. And, you know, we were playing all these great places like the Electric Circus. And once I was in the van with George and the people were queued up around the block, I go, well, who's playing tonight? He goes, you are, you idiot. And we had to run inside. It was like 5 minutes of understanding what it was like to be there.
Sure. Yeah.
And you know, my wife, you know what my wife tells me when I complain now?
Huh.
She goes, at least you had the 5 minutes.
Absolutely.
Most
Yeah.
don't.
Right.
So I can't complain about New York. It's been very good to me. It's a changed city.
Yeah.
I'm not real excited about it anymore, but it was what it was back then.
Yeah, that's great. Tell me a little bit about, had Keith started TRS or Twang at the time before you left?
Okay, that gets a little murky.
Okay.
When I left, I don't know obviously when I left, if I came back to his place on in the 20s off of Raspberry, he had moved into the Raven building.
Right. Yeah.
I look at when that really happened was when he moved into Phil Popotnik and Timmy Popotnik's place.
Gotcha. Okay. So
And I don't know, when would you say that was? The late 80s?
yeah, I'm thinking late 80s for moving what I call TRS, but you know what? We'll let John Mazza tell us all the details when I talk to him.
John Mazza,
Yeah.
my sound man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was he the sound man for? Which band?
He started from the very beginning, man, Jumpin' John. He lived with us, and I think I mentioned this to you, you know, his parents moved to the eastern part of Pennsylvania, and he hated it. And all of a sudden, John Mazza was walking up, not a change of clothes that I recall, with a carton, a milk carton full of records to move into our house. And John lived upstairs, and Steve McConnell was always there. The other person that was always there was John Drum.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
And John was completely out of his mind. He used to give carburetor shots in toilet paper rolls to my mother. All right. I mean, Chip, it was a very eerie. Flip Bellotti was hanging out. Everybody was hanging out.
Wow. All right. It was the place to be. All I had to do was look for a big red truck.
Yeah. Big red truck, and hopefully the police weren't following it.
Your poor dad, he probably had to explain a lot of things in those Chamber of Commerce meetings.
Well, you want to know what the thing about it is? Back then, there was no cell phones.
Yeah.
There was no social media.
Right.
So what went on there had nothing to do with what went on in downtown Erie.
Right. Yeah.
And, you know, because you take Mr. Visheko was friends with my father.
Okay.
Because he ran the bank downtown.
Oh, okay.
I forget the name of the bank, but Mr. Visheko. And we were all responsible citizens as far as they were concerned.
Yeah, you're right. No social media. You can do whatever you want.
Hey, carry on, my wayward son.
That's right. That's right. Well, that's very cool. What else? Are we missing any other bands back in the day?
Well, I think as long as I have this a little platform here, I want to thank a lot of people that helped me in my musical formation. And I apologize if I've skipped anyone, but the bands that were great.
Yeah.
You have to look at the Cows. I used to go at the Holiday Inn on, I think it was 18th Street. I don't remember.
That's right.
And see Ronnie Guzik, a hell of a keyboard player.
Right.
Dick Buckle, Joey Salarino, great drummer. I used to go out and hear Brian Fells play the guitar. I used to love every band that Bob Berger was in, from Kelly Sellers. And then I taught Marty Lee for a while. He was in the Raspberries. I didn't teach him or Tony Ferraro. I coached them.
Okay.
There's a difference.
Right.
All right. And I love the Raspberries. We used to go out and see all the bands play. Seeing Steve McConnell play the drums was an amazing experience.
With the Snowmen or with?
I was gone by the time the Snowmen around,
Okay,
but
so you saw him play.
I would just go catch him.
I mean, he was playing at the Cali Club. He was playing for Ruby Port for a while when he was really young. I mean,
yeah. And Steve, and I mean, Preston Lindy was an amazing guitar player. I used to go see him at a place out by the peninsula, and he turned me on to Howard Roberts and all the great jazz players.
Yeah.
And so all the people in Erie that I used to go see, and I cannot forget Raven.
Right. The band.
Phil Popotnik.
Right.
Timmy Popotnik.
Right.
That band was amazing, man.
Yeah.
That band made me want to play. Then I used to play the Hullabaloo Club a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And I saw other bands there, like the Raspberries, other musicians in Erie. Mike Miller is a tremendous talent, and his wife. And they've got a thing now, an acoustical thing that I look at from time to time, and he still sings like a bird. Yeah. I could go on and on and on. And if I've missed anybody, it's not on purpose. I totally apologize. But Erie was the best.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that was that thing we do.
Yeah. Well done. Yeah. Nice to tie it in there.
Yeah.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed Ed's episode, and I want to give Ed himself a big thank you for helping to support this podcast. You can also be a fan or a patron or whatever you want to call it by going to Patreon, that's Patreon, patreon.com, searching for Erie Music History, and signing up for whatever you think you can contribute. My thanks to Ted Gokel, and I hope I'm saying Ted's last name right, Ted and Mike and Marie Miller. They've all been Patreon supporters. But really special thanks goes to the JPT Foundation, my main sponsor. This is a nonprofit that has a big bingo hall in the Lake Erie Plaza that is next to Our Lady of Peace on West 38th Street, where the old McLean Church used to be. In addition to bingo, they rent it out for all sorts of functions. Whatever you need a big hall for, they can accommodate for it. So check them out at JPT Foundation, all one word, jptfoundation.com for more info. If you want to check out what this room or what this hall looks like, and you don't want to play bingo, come check out the live music night that I'm coordinating, featuring Erie's own fabulous Leftovers band at that JPT Foundation Hall. This event's going to be on February 22nd. That's a Tuesday from 6 to 9. It's totally free, and all the donations will go to the Second Harvest Food Bank. So it's BYOB, everything. You can bring whatever you want. There'll be some pizza there. There'll be snacks to purchase, but come check it out. We're going to have the Fabulous Leftovers. They're a band of local musicians, veteran musicians. They're going to be playing a lot of classic rock and some really good tunes. So come check it out. And then after that, we're going to open it up to other folks for like an open mic night. All right. That's enough for me. Thanks for listening.